What's up, coaches, male athletes? Kip Ioane, Teams of Men, founder, lead facilitator here. Welcome to another edition of our Journey and Reflection series, where we take current events, we take studies, we take recently released research, we take content from social media platforms that we think as coaches of male athletes, you should put through our self-reflection plus self-interrogation equals true self-awareness mantra. And we provide you actual questions to use with your players, with your staff, with yourself in unpacking the work that we share and amplify from professionals in the related fields to our work. A reminder to subscribe, like, follow, smash that follow button for our YouTube channel, which has been growing and amplifying our platform. And as always, Teams of Men exists to empower coaches of male athletes to enlighten their athletes to the potential of a reimagined manhood. And in becoming men of compassion, men of empathy, men of emotional fluency, men of healthy relationship skills, breaking free of the man box, we can be frontline change agents in the fight against gender violence and oppression in all its forms. So welcome back, Teams of Men, Journey and Reflection. All right, Coach, let me give you an outline and overview of the work we're citing and helping you learn, debrief, engage your young men with. And yourself and your staff, hopefully, if you're doing this mirror training correctly. This is from Dr. Nicole Badera, and we'll put her up right here in a little picture-in-a-picture. Sociologist studying how our social structures make sexual violence more likely. She's author of On the Wrong Side, and she's co-founder of Beyond Compliance with a PhD at University of Michigan. At NBEDERA, Dr. Nicole Badera on X. And her work we're citing today was published in the Violence Against Women, Volume 27, Issue 1516 in December of 2021. And the research article that she did all this and put out was called Moaning and Eye Contact, Men's Use of Ambiguous Signals in Attributions of Consent to Their Partners. And why this is important is this research and the work and the stuff she put out is a critical discussion that it extends far beyond the playing fields, the basketball courts, the baseball diamonds that your athletes exist in, and goes deeply into their personal and intimate lives. But we also know without correct navigation and appropriate healthy navigation of their intimate relationships, our young men's lives and the partners they have's lives can be upended in horrendous ways if they don't have consent skills, if they don't have healthy relationship skills. I'm going to give you an outline of the core findings of Dr. Badera's work, and hopefully we can underscore its profound implications for how we as influencers and mentors and leaders of young men can guide them towards healthier, more respectful relationships. So this study in general, okay, moaning at eye contact, men's use of ambiguous signals and attributions of consent to their partners. Okay, her research, Dr. Badera's research reveals a troubling disconnect between what men say they know about affirmative consent and what they actually do in the heat of passion, in the heat of the moment. Despite acknowledging the importance of clear verbal consent, many men admit to and are still reverting to interpreting ambiguous nonverbal cues, things like moaning or eye contact, as their ascertaining of consent to proceed forward with sex. This reliance on guesswork rather than communication creates a gray area that can lead to misunderstandings at best and violations, perpetrations of sexual harms and domestic violence at worst. Let me say that again. When you rely on our young men and your male athletes in your program, rely on guesswork and consent rather than clear communication and the trainings they've been given, they land in gray areas that at best are misunderstandings and at worst, perpetrations of harm. What's more, this behavior persists even among men and male athletes who have received formal education on the subject, suggesting that the ways we're going about deploying and educating on consent is not penetrating deeply enough to change entrenched behaviors and entrenched false ideas of what consent is. So that's the overview of Dr. Badera's work in general. And obviously, when we put this episode out, we'll link to the full study in the description of the video and any of the social medias that we market this video breakdown to. But I'm going to give you now 5 takeaways, 5 synopsis of what Dr. Badera found in her work, and 5 self-interrogation questions for you, for your staff, and your young men to deep dive together and explore together in hopes of avoiding any of these quote unquote misunderstandings, or like the article states, worst case scenario perpetrations of harm and sexual assault. First one, and we'll cut away to it here. The discrepancy between understanding and action. So this direct quote from Dr. Badera's work. Although explicit conversations about sexual expectations comprised a third of the ideal strategies participants claimed to use in her work, they made up only 13% of the signals they recalled drawing upon in their recent sexual encounters. So this means coaches, assistant coaches, team members, as male athletes, we are getting trained in what actual consent is. We are recalling and stating we know what we've been taught. But when the moment comes, we fall back on old I read her nonverbal cues, granting ourselves supposedly consent to proceed with sexual relations. Why? The self-interrogation moment here for our group to debrief right now together. Why are we ignoring what we were taught when it matters most? Why are we ignoring what we were taught when it matters most? And coaches, for you, you would never allow, or you would be exceptionally frustrated and go to work trying to address things in the game that happened that you know you addressed in practice, you addressed in film, you repped, you designed learning in, you designed growth in. They should be able to make better decision-making action in the game, and it's not happening. You would never settle for, well, we taught them, but it's not happening in real life, so we'll just move forward. You would go back to work and demand accountability and demand that your players showcase what they were taught in the heat of the game. Imagine tripling, quadrupling, quintupling the stakes, that we need to demand what they're taught in consent and getting consent from their partners is actually happening in their real lives. Next, number 2, journey and reflection. Ambiguity in consent-seeking behaviors. So from the article directly, of the signals referenced by participants describing their most recent sexual encounters, 39% referred to ambiguous and non-sexual physical signals, e.g. eye contact, dancing certain ways, as notifying this person that they had consent. There's self-interrogation moment for you, your staff, and your players. As male athletes, we often think a glance or a dance or some other ambiguous trait is enough to signal consent for furthering in sexual relations. But is acting on such ambiguity fair to our partners? How can we shift towards seeking what we already know we should in getting clear verbal consent, or ourselves? What would we expect from our partner? Would we want them to take action on ambiguous nonverbal cues instead of seeking our clear verbal consent to continue with our bodies? Third, journey and reflection for coaches and staffs and male athletes watching this video, hopefully together, and going on this journey of curiosity and vulnerability together. Misinterpretation of non-sexual actions. So a direct quote from one of the participants in the study. Jalen, an 18-year-old, used a string of his partner's physical, non-sexual actions to explain how he became certain that sex would occur between them. Everything she did screamed sex. She wore no bra. She put on some great music. She was even twerking on bed, laying down. But remember, in this self-interrogation statement in question I want you to ask, based upon what Jalen said in the study, we're taught in this room, we've been exposed to respect clear and affirmative consent. Yet this story, like Jalen's, show we might be still reading too much into casual actions and nonverbal cues. Are we making mistakes, or are we choosing intentionally to misinterpret signals to give ourselves false permission and an easier path to sex, which we know would put us directly in perpetrating gender violence, sexual harm? Number 4 in our journey and reflection series, influence of gender norms. The article talks about researchers have found that men who engage in hostile masculinity are especially likely to claim to misinterpret a partner's sexual cues. And reinterpretation of a victim's mundane actions as indicators of consent is a common tactic used by rapists to justify their violence. That's directly from the article. So for our self-interrogation moment as a group, as a team, as a program, gender norms often teach men to pursue but not to confirm consent. How do these norms affect our understanding of consent? And what steps can we take to ensure our actions truly respect our partner's autonomy? Fifth and final in our journey and reflection from the work from Dr. Nicole Badera, accountability and change. The normalization of ambiguity in sexual interactions and narratives about them, whether consensual or not, can make the task of defining responding to violence harder. Self-interrogation moment for everybody watching. Even when we know better, we are defaulting to vibe checking instead of communicating clearly when it comes to consent with our partners in sexual relationships moments. What does this say about our commitment to consent? And how can we be better allies and advocates for clear consent practices and following through on doing what we know is required of us as men in attaining clear affirmative verbal consent? Now, Coach, I know some of you might be thinking, hey, Kip, I watched this. I didn't watch it with my team yet. I watched it with me. I watched it with my staff. And we're concerned that I don't know the answers to some of these. Well, we're concerned that when you said your guys as male athletes, you've been taught better in consent. I don't think my guys have. Well, then, Coach, I would thank you for that self-reflection. And turn it on self-interrogation now. Like, my guys have not been taught consent education. They have not been around affirmative consent training. Why not? Whose job is it, if it's not yours, to find that training for them? I'm not saying you need to go take a course and you are qualified enough now to teach consent, but why aren't you exposing them to people that are? If you're at the college level, it's very doable. There's somebody on your campus right now that does this work. If you're at the high school level, that's why Teams of Men exists. We do training around consent. We connect you with experts and give you curriculum that's built in best practices for consent training. Your players trust you. Your players show up every day to learn and grow from you. And if you had answers and questions in this reflection around why men are not acting upon the best practices consent training they're getting in the actual real world, and your default is, I don't think my guys got that training, take a step, take action. You should be activated now to find them that training. And now, if your guys have been exposed and you have done the great work of getting them in front of consent professionals, and now they're not acting upon it, that's upon you to now dive into what accountability means in the real world. Because you, like we mentioned in one of the earlier questions, you would never allow them to settle for, I was taught better, I was practiced this, we repped it, and we're not doing it in a game. You would lose your mind. There would be consequences for players that could not perform what they were taught is the way we're going to play in the game when it mattered most. So what are the consequences? What is the accountability steps to get our men and our male athletes to truly act upon and seek out affirmative, verbal, enthusiastic consent with their partners, instead of saying, well, I was taught this, but I'm not exactly following through on that? That's on us. We can influence that, and we can cause change in a positive way going forward as mentors, trusted voices in the lives of our male athletes. Journey and reflection, Teams of Men. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you dove into the interrogation. I hope you find actual self-awareness and activation towards change in behavior, change in mindsets. And as always, like, follow, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you on the next one.